This is the FPL Draft Zone, your fantasy team's best signing of the season.
Draft managers assemble. The Premier League kicks off in less than 2 weeks, but which pre-season performers should you have your eye on? We take a look at 5 mock drafts and sound a striker warning bell, and we shortlist a few under-the-radar picks for your draft night. Hello and welcome to the FPL Draft Zone, a podcast all about Draft FPL. I am Dom Crofts and I hope you are well. And today we are going to continue looking ahead to the start of the season and assess a few more pre-season player performances that may just have evaded your attention. Plus, we're taking a look at 5 mock drafts that we've taken part in to see what patterns we've noticed in terms of player picks, and there are patterns to take notice of, and we're going to be sharing a short list of players with you who are either forgotten men in the Premier League or under the radar picks, but all of whom could be key to your draft night success. But first, let's work our way through a few of those pre-season stories, because there have been a lot more matches played since we were last here, and they have provided us with a lot more information to take into our draft nights that may just give us a little advantage over our rivals. And first up, it's Arsenal, who lost 2-1 to Liverpool in midweek. They announced the signing of Riccardo Calafiori before this one, which further strengthens their backline and quite possibly adds a few more dilemmas to draft managers who are looking at Arsenal defenders. For this game, it was a back four of Ben White, Jakub Kiwior, Gabriel and Zinchenko. William Saliba is still absent after France's Euro 2024 efforts. Calafiori was not risked in this one, having just joined up with the squad. And Jurrien Timber's minutes were managed for this one, so he didn't play either. But there was a first start of pre-season for Kai Havertz, who scored from a Martin Ødegaard assist. Havertz started in midfield again, but with rumours of Mikel Merino signing for Arsenal, the likelihood is that Havertz may well revert to that number 9 position, although as mentioned on previous pods, his minutes may well be shared a little more with the return of Gabi Jesus to full fitness. Aston Villa lost their second pre-season friendly in a row with defeat to RB Leipzig. They used 22 players in this one, so not a huge amount you can read into it. Digne and Maatsen shared minutes at left-back. John McGinn and Jacob Ramsey made their first appearances of pre-season. And Diego Carlos was sent off for Villa. Morgan Rogers played an hour, but Emi Buendia also got 30 minutes as he continues his comeback from long-term injury. Brentford lost 3-1 to Estrela de Amadora in Portugal, and with the news that Thiago will be out until the end of the year, they lined up with a front three of Mbumo, Sharda and Wissa. And depending on what happens with Ivan Toney's future, that could well be the front three for their opening game of the season at home to Crystal Palace. They then drew 1-1 with Watford. Sharda scored in that one. It was his second goal of pre-season. And Damsgaard played in a much more offensive role than has been known up to this point during his Brentford career. He was given the freedom to create in a much more advanced position for the Bees, so that's one to keep an eye on with a view to potential fifth choice midfielders. Brighton lost Pascal Gross to Borussia Dortmund this week, and draft managers lost a very solid midfield pick as a result. But having been in Japan, they returned to England to beat QPR 1-0. Danny Welbeck scored the only goal of the game from the penalty spot, but Minte was again the standout performer. He won the penalty for his team. Chelsea beat Club America 3-0 to give Enzo Maresca his first win of pre-season. Christopher Nkunku scored again, but it was a penalty again, where you'd imagine Cole Palmer will be first choice when it comes to spot kicks. Noni Madueke also scored from the spot, with Mark Guéhiou again impressing up front. The general consensus remains that he is one for the future. He may well go out on loan, but he is definitely doing his best to force his way into Maresca's plans. Philip Jorgensen got his first minutes in goal as well, and Dewsbury Hall got his first outing in a Chelsea shirt and got an assist. Then it was on to Manchester City for Chelsea, and they were beaten 4-2, and Kunku started up front in this one. Sanchez got the nod in goal to really complicate that position for draft managers. Sterling and Madueke scored the goals. Crystal Palace, well, they beat Wolves 3-1 in America in the early hours of Thursday morning, with Jeffrey Schlupp and Jordan Ayew among the goal scorers. Daichi Kamada played well again. He hit the post. Wharton, Richards and Henderson all pitched in positive performances as well. And then Palace beat West Ham 3-1. Another really impressive performance from the Eagles, who were missing half their squad for this one, with the likes of Lerma, Eze, Sarr, Munoz, Mateta, Mark Gahey and Wharton all absent. Mitchell, Schlupp and Edouard scored the goals, and Henderson made it 4 starts in a row in goals, so it does seem that he has got that number 1 slot nailed ahead of Johnston. Everton's disappointing pre-season continued with an absolute battering at Coventry. They lost 3-0 in a game that saw the likes of McNeil, DCL, Harrison and Garner all start. There was no Mikolenko, who is being heavily linked with a move to Napoli, and Everton were also missing the likes of Tarkowski and Pickford. But despite that, it was a very bad day at the office for the Toffees. They responded well in their next game, though, winning 3-0 at Preston. DCL scored in this one, as did 2 new signings, Jake O'Brien and Jesper Lindstrom. O'Brien smashed home from the edge of the box after coming on as a sub. Lindstrom, who is on loan from Napoli, scored a brilliant free kick. The Danish international did not pull up any trees in Italy in his 1 season with Napoli, but he did have 2 very good years in Germany with Eintracht Frankfurt. He's not prolific. He is creative, though, very offensive-minded midfielder, and he is potentially one to keep an eye on as the season progresses to see if he could become a bit of a talismanic figure at Goodison Park. Fulham, well, they announced the signing of Emil Smith-Rowe this week, and they also won against Benfica in a game they absolutely dominated. It finished 1-0. It could have been a lot more. Alex Iwobi scored the only goal of the game, but Muniz was a real handful up front. And while some FPL managers might have doubts about both him and Mateta, based on the fact that they've only really had 1 good season, or arguably only 1 good half a season, all the signs are that Muniz is more than a one-trick pony, more than a one-season wonder. He's been given the number 9 shirt by Marco Silva. He's going to have the creativity of Emil Smith-Rowe behind him, and he has no competition up front, and that is crucial because you look at someone like Chris Wood, and he's going to have Awoniyi battling for minutes alongside him. Muniz, he has got nobody. So he is definitely a player you should not be underestimating when it comes to draft night. And we'll be talking more about underestimating strikers on draft night a little later on. Ipswich, well, they were due to play Borussia Mönchengladbach this week, but they ended up playing their under-21 team instead of their first team. They did, however, go pretty strong against Hoffenheim, and they won that one 1-0. Connor Townsend made his first appearance for the club. He's a fullback who's signed from West Bromwich Albion. Jack Taylor scored the only goal of the game. And for those of you who don't know the Ipswich squad that well, and I think that's most of us, he is a midfielder, Jack Taylor. He got a couple of goals and a couple of assists in the Championship last season, but he did not do that much in front of goal. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at these Ipswich results and you're looking at these Ipswich goal scorers. Leicester lost 1-0 to FC Augsburg this week. Not much to report on this one. Mavididi had the best chance for Leicester as he continues to look like the talisman of that club. And Jamie Vardy was absent up front again, which means that in all likelihood, Patson Daka will start that first game of the season at home to Spurs. As we've already discussed, Liverpool beat Arsenal in the US, but some real positives from a Liverpool perspective, with Harvey Elliott getting 2 assists and playing really well again. He has had an excellent pre-season for Liverpool. He's been heavily involved in all the good stuff they've done, and his second assist in this game was outrageous. Szoboszlai played in a much deeper midfield role than you would expect. He did not get forward as much as normal, but remember, Liverpool are still missing Alexis McAllister, so I would not read too much into the positioning of Szoboszlai in this one. Carvalho, though, who had a good loan spell last season at Hull, looks like he could be forcing his way into Arne Slot's plans this season. He has had an impact in a few friendlies now. He scored in this one. Lots of positives for Liverpool, and a few players just beginning to put their hand up and demand first-team football at Anfield, and that could help us draft managers to really flesh out our squads with a few under-the-radar options. And those players continued to impress when Liverpool played Manchester United and they beat United 3-0. Carvalho scored again in this one. Tsimikas and Curtis Jones were also on the score sheet. Salah looked great, and Conor Bradley continued at right back in the absence of Trent Alexander-Arnold, and he could be a clever pickup in draft leagues. Bigger draft leagues I'm talking about here, with the possibility that Trent might be moved further forward under Arne Slot. So if you can get Conor Bradley in a 14-team league, it may well be an astute move on draft night. Manchester City drew 2-2 with Barcelona. City played a real skeleton side in this one, with Calvin Phillips having to fill in at centre-back, but Jack Grealish played well and he scored a good goal as well. He seems odds-on to start in that opening weekend game against Chelsea, purely given the lack of game time from some of City's missing midfield assets. City followed up that draw with a 4-2 win against Chelsea. Oscar Bobb scored again in this one, and he has had a lovely pre-season. 2 assists and a goal against Celtic. An assist against AC Milan. He blanked in the draw with Barcelona this week, but then a goal against Chelsea. And both he and Grealish are really pushing for starts in those opening games of the season. And Pep has been very complimentary of both. With Grealish, he said Jack has had an unbelievable 3 games. Against Barcelona, he made 5 shots, 1 goal, and today he is aggressive. I remember perfectly the Jack I know. Not how he performs, but how he's training and his behaviours, which are like 2 seasons ago. There's a lot of competition there, but the best player who produces for the team will play. And he probably followed that up by going, so good. Oh, Jack Grealish, so good. Because that's what Pep does. So it sounds like Grealish could be in pole position to play for City. And if he continues the form he's shown in pre-season, who's to say he won't cement a regular place in that City starting 11. Going back to Oscar Bobb, and Pep also described his pre-season performances as unbelievable. Oh, so unbelievable. So who knows? Maybe this could be a breakout season for Oscar Bobb as well, and his ascendancy at the club would certainly explain their decision to sell Cole Palmer last season, because on the face of it, that seems cray-cray. James McAtee, by the way, who was on loan at Sheffield United last season and did quite well for the Blades, is also going to be part of the City squad this season. There was talk that he might go out on loan, but Pep Guardiola has confirmed that he will be part of the City squad, and he got 2 assists against Chelsea. Manchester United beat Real Betis 3-2 this week, with Marcus Rashford scoring from the penalty spot, Casemiro on target, and Amad Diallo scoring again. As well as his goal, Diallo created 3 big chances and he won the penalty from which Rashford scored, so his pre-season form continues. Rashford limped off injured in this one before returning in that game against Liverpool, but Lenny Yoro and Rasmus Højlund are out for a while. Harry Mas, he's won a lot of praise for his performances at left-back in pre-season for United, but you'd imagine Luke Shaw will slot back in there when he returns from his summer break. That 3-0 defeat to Liverpool was a poor result, but Amas played well again, Mason Mount looked lively, and Marcus Rashford pitched in another very strong performance, and he does look back to something like his best. So who knows, maybe he could hit another 20-plus goal season. Newcastle beat Urawa Red Diamonds 4-1 and looked good, albeit against limited opposition. Isak scored again. His stock is predictably high right now, but Jacob Murphy continues to impress as well. He's got 4 goals and an assist so far in pre-season, and even though Newcastle seem to be actively looking for a new right winger, and Noni Madueke has been strongly linked with a move to St James's Park, Murphy is doing all he can to convince Eddie Howe that he is a viable first-team option. Lewis Hall has had an impressive pre-season as well, and I think he could be a low-key excellent pick this season. He's played in midfield for the most part of pre-season. He's across set pieces though, and he could well end up playing in that inverted left-back role. Newcastle followed that victory up with a 2-0 defeat to Yokohama F. Marinos, and Hall looked a little bit more vulnerable in this one from a defensive perspective. Isak hurt his shoulder as well, so that's one injury concern to keep an eye on, and no one else really did anything to enhance their reputations. Nottingham Forest continued their busy pre-season with a dullard 0-0 draw against Villarreal. Seltz started in goal and seems likely to be first choice goalkeeper on the opening day. Chris Woods also seems to have cemented his place as the starting striker in the continued absence of Awoniyi. Ole Aina started at left back and he played very well, and you would now assume that given his form in pre-season when he has played, he will start there ahead of former Bayern player Omar Richards. We spoke about Richards in a previous pod, thought he might be one to keep an eye on, but we're thinking now he's probably going to be second fiddle to Ola Aina. Southampton lost 2-0 to Oxford United this week. Armstrong got 45 minutes up front but offered very little, but then they played Millwall and Armstrong played and Armstrong scored the only goal of the game. He would be a lovely pickup as a third striker in your draft team. Spurs, well, they've been an interesting watch in pre-season. This week they beat a K-League all-star team 4-3, with Dejan Kulusevski occupying a false 9 role and looking very good there too. Spurs have been linked with a move for Ivan Toney. They've also been linked with Dominic Solanke this week. But if they don't manage to get either of those over the line, they may well start the season with Kulu up front. Richarlison is still being linked with a move away from the club. Kulu looks good in that central position, and it also seems to bring the best out of Heung-min Son, who scored twice in this one, and that could mean that Kulu could be a golden draft signing, an out-of-position midfielder playing up front for a top 6 team. Yes, please! A word as well, by the way, for Jed Spence, who has had a very good pre-season for Spurs and potentially rescued his future at the club. He's not one for draft night, but he's just one to be aware of as the season progresses to see how many minutes he gets. Spurs also played Bayern Munich this week and they were beaten 2-1. Pedro Porro scored again though. He's been very good in pre-season as well, particularly from an offensive point of view. And Spence played again and did well. Johnson had a day to forget, but he's had some pretty memorable days in pre-season up to this point. And new signing Lucas Bergvall was a real positive in this one and could easily have got on the score sheet. As we've mentioned, West Ham were beaten 3-1 by Crystal Palace in America, but Kudos was a real bright spark for the Hammers and continues to look like the go-to pickup from the East Londoners. West Ham, though, were awful defensively, full of mistakes, and the hopes of Julian Lopetegui arresting that slide in terms of their quality at the back appear to be fading and fading fast. So I would not be looking at that Hammers defensive backline right now ahead of draft night. Michael Antonio did score the goal for West Ham, but his place in the first team may be short-lived, with West Ham looking set to sign Nicholas Füllkrug from Borussia Dortmund, strengthening their and our striker options on draft night. As we've already mentioned, Wolves were another team beaten 3-1 by Crystal Palace this week. Bueno got the consolation goal for Wolves. In injury time, Strand Larsen got an assist. It was a bit of a shadow side put out by Gary O'Neill, so not too much to report on this one. Wolves were dealt a blow this week with Cunha picking up a hamstring injury. It does sound like he's going to be fit for the start of the season, but whether he'll be match fit for that opener against Arsenal, I'm not so sure. But after that Palace defeat, Wolves stepped up, played RB Leipzig, and they won 3-0. A very impressive performance in this one. Sarabia scored twice. Rodrigo Gomez scored again for his new club and continues to strengthen his draft potential. Strand Larsen hit a post. We shouldn't forget him as a striker option. And Hwang got an assist as well. So those are the key friendlies that have taken place in the last week. And the likes of Kulusevski, Jacob Murphy, Harvey Elliott and Lewis Hall should now all be in your thoughts for unfashionable but potentially strong mid to late round draft picks depending on your league size. And we will go over a few more names to think about ahead of draft night a little later in the show. But talking about draft night, that brings us to a little segment on mock drafts, because we've done a fair few now just to see if there are any trends in terms of where players are being picked and which players are maybe being drafted earlier or later than you might think. And we wanted to share one pattern that has come up with you. And it is, of course, a relatively small sample size, but we're going to take you through the first 3 rounds of 5 8-team mock drafts that we've done. So that's the top 24 picks 5 times over. And we're going to flag a few players who seem to be out of favour compared to their official FPL draft rankings. So just a reminder, we're going to take you through the first 3 rounds of 5 8-team mock drafts. Okay? That's what we're going to do. So let's start with a quick reminder of the players making up the top 24 places based on the FPL official rankings. We're going to rattle through these, but based on their rankings, the first round of your draft league in an 8-team league would see the following players picked: Erling Haaland, Mo Salah, Cole Palmer, Bukayo Saka, Heung-min Son, Phil Foden, KDB, and Ollie Watkins. No real surprises there. Round 2 would see these 8 players picked: Ødegaard, Isak, Bruno Fernandes, Kai Havertz, Gordon, Bowen, Solanke, and Mateta. And then round 3 would see these players picked: Nicholas Jackson, Luis Diaz, Darwin Núñez, James Maddison, Diogo Jota, Cody Gakpo, Ivan Toney, and Julian Alvarez. So looking at the first mock draft we took part in, and a few players who sneaked into the top 24 who are not in those official rankings, Trent Alexander-Arnold, who was drafted 14th in our first mock draft, and Jurrien Timber, which is a bit of a strange one. He was drafted 120 places higher than his FPL draft ranking. He was picked as the 24th pick. A few other things to note in this draft. Isak was drafted a lot higher than FPL predicts. He was 6th pick. Watkins was 7th pick, and their early drafts meant that the likes of Son, KDB, and Erdegaard were all drafted a little later than expected. But interestingly, quite a lot of strikers were drafted later than expected. Solanke, Mateta, Nicholas Jackson, and Darwin Núñez were all drafted far lower than their FPL draft ranking. So please keep that in mind and remember that as we move on to Mock Draft 2. And it was the usual suspects filling the top 5 picks in this one. Ollie Watkins was picked earlier again, though. He was picked 6th. There were a few left field picks in there as well. Gvardiol was picked 8th overall, 66 places higher than expected. Diogo Jota was picked 9th. And in the most insane pick of all the mock drafts I have ever done in my entire life, Jordan Pickford was selected 16th overall. And I can only assume that the manager who did that is either Jordan Pickford or Jordan Pickford's mum. Trent made the top 24 again. He was drafted 22nd in this draft. But again, the strikers come out worse than predicted. This time with Havertz, Solanke, Mateta, and Jackson all drafted later than FPL predicts. And together they dropped 15 places in those draft rankings overall. So there is a pattern emerging. And it involves those second-tier strikers outside of Haaland, Watkins, and Isak, who managers seem to be overlooking in favour of other positions. Let's move on to Mock Draft 3, where again there were some pretty mad picks. Leon Bailey, he was drafted 6th overall in this one. Morgan Gibbs-White was drafted 11th. And interestingly, Brian Mbeumo was drafted 10 places higher than his FPL draft rank. And in my opinion, with quite good reason, even more so now Thiago is injured in the long term. Mohamed Kudus also made the top 24. He was drafted 22nd, which is a bit high, but I do think he is an undervalued asset right now. FPL ranks him as the 45th most valuable player. But again, those same strikers suffered once more, with Solanke, Mateta, and Jackson again being drafted later than expected. Mock Draft 4 does buck the striker trend a little. Watkins was drafted 3rd. Solanke, Mateta, and Ivan Toney were all drafted far earlier than expected in this one. But then in Mock Draft 5, Mateta and Jackson are again drafted later than expected. So the trend seems to be that outside of Haaland, Isak, Watkins, and to an extent Kai Havertz, draft managers do not fancy that second tier level of striker. They prefer to prioritise other positions early in the draft instead. And as I mentioned, I think that is a big mistake, because at the end of your draft, you have to have 3 forwards in your squad. And in the whole game, there are only 68 strikers to choose from. And many of those 68 strikers are absolutely useless draft assets. There are players in there that have never played in the Premier League. There are players that are reserve strikers that won't get a look in. And there are players like Eddie Nketiah and Dennis Undav who in all likelihood will not even be playing in this country this season. Meanwhile, compare those 68 strikers to your options in midfield, which is where most managers would be looking if they're not drafting a forward, and there are around 250 players to choose from. And while there are still players in there that you won't want to touch, there are far more good options than there are in those striking positions. And that means you can still get a quality midfielder in a later round, which is definitely not the case if you're looking to grab a striker in a later round. Take this as an example. If you're in an 8-team league and you get second pick, you will have lost out on Erling Haaland, and in all likelihood, your first pick will be Mo Salah. That's going to be your first pick. Then your next pick is 15th overall, and then you get 18th overall. By then, Alexander Isak will be gone. Ollie Watkins will be gone. And Kai Havertz will probably be gone as well. But for one of those picks, you have to get yourself a quality forward, because if you do not, your next pick is the 31st pick overall. And then you really will be fishing around for a forward of any requisite quality. And remember, whoever you get as your first forward, that's going to be your main man for the whole season. You will not get a better forward than the first forward you pick. So you really need to act fast and get the best you can while they are available. And of course, the striker problem becomes even more dicey the bigger the league you're in. The striker pool of players, as we've said, is really quite minimal. And the pool of midfielders is vast. It's kind of like a rock pool versus the sea. So do keep that in mind. Strikers equals rock pool. Midfielders equals the sea. And to really spell it out to you, what we're going to do is we're going to go through FPL's official draft rankings for the 25th best midfielder and the 25th best striker, the 30th best midfielder and the 30th best striker, and the 35th best midfielder and the 35th best striker. And hopefully you'll see that if you don't move for a forward fast, you could find yourself in big trouble. But midfield options will still be available to you. So the 25th best midfielder in the game, according to the FPL official draft rankings, is Declan Rice. 165 points last season, 7 goals, 9 assists, plays in one of the best teams in the division. In comparison, the 25th best forward available, based on the FPL draft rankings, is John Duran. 50 points last season, 5 goals, 1 assist, did not get many minutes. The trend continues when we look at the 30th best midfielder. That was Brennan Johnson. 131 points, 5 goals and 12 assists. The 30th best striker, Michail Antonio. 78 points, 6 goals and 2 assists. And the 35th best midfielder, Jeremy Doku. 3 goals, 10 assists and 98 points. Compared to the 35th best forward, Armando Broja, 35 points, 1 goal, 2 assists, and a lovely view of the pitch from the Fulham bench. Midfielders that are ranked even lower than 35, by the way, according to those official FPL draft rankings, include the likes of Neto, Madueke, Harvey Barnes, Christopher Nkunku, Dewsbury Hall, and Callum Hudson-Odoi, all of whom I think you'd be pretty happy with on draft night. But forwards lower than 35th include Youssef Chamiti, Fabio Silva, Emmanuel Dennis, Dane Scarlett, and Ali Al-Hamadi. And let's be honest, if you end up with any of them, you might as well just retire from draft entirely. Now, as I said, the larger the league that you're in, the bigger this striker problem is. But even if you're in a smaller league, you really need to be looking at these forwards and making sure you have at least one in your squad who you can rely on within the first 2 to 3 rounds. And that is why nobody can afford to get sniffy over the likes of Nicholas Jackson, Mateta, or Darwin Núñez. No, they are not Erling Haaland. They are not Ollie Watkins. They are not Alexander Isak. They will not get you 30 goals this season, but they will be an integral part of your squad structure. And without them, you are going to end up with a front three from hell. So do not underestimate the importance of getting at least one proven striker in your draft within the first 2 to 3 rounds. It is a game-changing move, and if you don't make it, your season will suffer. Okay, time to take a look now at some of the new signings or potential new signings that could be available to you on draft night, or at the very least on the waivers during the course of those early weeks of the season. And then we're going to reel off a list of players who probably won't be first choice for you on draft night, but crucially, they won't be first choice for your rivals either. And maybe one or two of them could be a dark horse who surprises us all this season. So the big moves in the transfer market this week are Jota Silva, who is a winger that signed for Nottingham Forest. He can play anywhere across the front line. He got 15 goals and 7 assists in Portugal, and his signing does raise question marks over who is going to suffer reduced minutes as a result. The likes of Elanga and Hudson-Odoi are at most risk. He's been described as the Portuguese Jack Grealish, so expect Alice bands, incredible calves, and for him to be absolutely smashed when Forest survive on the last day of the season. Ben Brereton Diaz has signed for Southampton. We'll talk about him in a little while. And Everton have signed Jake O'Brien from Lyon. He's a 6'6" defender. He gives Sean Dyche another option at the back and raises questions about how they might line up. Will they go 3 at the back to accommodate him with Tarkowski and Branthwaite, or will Branthwaite leave, given he's been heavily linked with a move away this summer? O'Brien scored in his first appearance of the season in that win over Preston. Chido Obi Martin has left Arsenal for Manchester United. This is a strange one and not one we would normally flag. It's a bit of a shock for Arsenal fans, but also for Manchester United fans, as he's one of about 3 players in their squad who isn't Dutch. He scored 32 goals in 18 games last season for Arsenal under-18s, including 10 goals in 1 game against Liverpool. But apparently, and this is why he is interesting, apparently he's been told he will be Manchester United's 3rd choice striker this season, and they've already lost Rasmus Højlund. So let's just keep an eye on how much game time Obi Martin gets over the next few weeks. But he's one just to have right at the back of your mind, and just think, if that is true, if he is signed because they have assured him he will be 3rd choice, and Rasmus Højlund is out for months, let me just do the maths. That makes him 2nd choice. Crescencio Somerville has joined West Ham from Leeds United. He is a winger, and he got 19 goals and 9 assists last season in the Championship. He could be a great bit of business for them. And even though their pre-season has been massively underwhelming, they look like they have a very exciting front line with a potential front 4 of Bowen, Kudos, Somerville, and incoming German striker Füllkrug. Paqueta and Alvarez behind them in midfield as well. And there's one word to describe that sixum, and that is woof. Mark Gahey is being linked with Newcastle United. Spurs are being linked with Dominic Solanke. And a possible outgoing for you, Julian Alvarez, who sounds like he might be heading out of Manchester City with Atletico Madrid, a rumoured destination. And it's definitely worth keeping an eye on possible sales before your draft night, because any players leaving for non-Premier League clubs really could bite you on the bum. And as a prime example of this from last season, think Harry Kane, who joined Bayern Munich on the 12th of August, having been heavily linked with the Germans for about a month beforehand. But there was all this toing and froing and all these rumours, would he stay, would he go, would he stay, would he go? Lots of managers would have faced the dilemma of having to draft him or having to avoid him. And if you drafted him, and let's be honest, most of us would have drafted him, you would have been facing a real uphill battle to save your season, having seen him sign for Bayern Munich. So when you hear rumours about the likes of Alvarez and Kevin De Bruyne and lots of other players of decent quality being linked with a move away from the Premier League, you need to be very aware of it, and you need to weigh up that risk before making any draft day decision. So when you're doing your draft rankings, keep that in mind for Alvarez. Keep it in mind for Kevin De Bruyne and Ederson and all these other players being linked with moves away to other clubs in other countries, and just put a value to that accordingly. They might be high in your draft rankings if they weren't being linked with those moves, but now that they are those draft rankings dwindling down a little bit further? Okay, now for that list of players who are either forgotten men in FPL because of recent injury issues, or they are players who maybe, just maybe, are not on your rival managers' radars at the moment because they don't know just how good they might be. So first, a few forgotten men, and first up, Emi Buendia, who missed last season with a serious knee ligament injury that he picked up just before the big kickoff. Before that, though, he was pretty much a lock in Unai Emery's team. There has, of course, been a lot of talk about Morgan Roberts' potential this season, and rightly so, but Buendia replaced him in their recent defeat to Columbus Crew, and Emery described his return as fantastic. The season before last, which was Emery's first in charge, Buendia featured in every top-flight game. He started 27 of those games. He scored 5 goals and he got 2 assists. He had an average of 1.3 shots per game, and of the 5 goals he scored that season, 2 were with his left foot, 2 were with his right foot, and there was even a header in there as well. And if he can pinch that advanced second striker slot for himself ahead of Morgan Rogers, he could be a very astute bit of draft business. He's returning to a far stronger Villa team than the one he was in before his injury, but you can look at that in one of 2 ways. 1, he might play less minutes, that's bad. Or 2, he's going to be playing alongside better players in a better team that is full of confidence. And that is good. And I tend to favour that option over option 1. So Buendia is a player to keep in the back of your mind because he is a player with a very high upside if he can break into that Villa starting 11 on a regular basis. Another forgotten man with a lot to prove this season, but with a proven track record, is Mason Mount. He was another player who missed the vast majority of last season through injury, but it was only 2 seasons ago that he ended the season with 10 goals and 11 assists from 32 league games. He's played well in United's pre-season games against Arsenal and Liverpool. He's already picked up an assist in pre-season as well. He's made 6 key passes in his friendly appearances, and he can play in several different roles, which gives him more of a chance of getting regular minutes for United. United have the Community Shield coming up against Manchester City, so let's just see what Mount's involvement is in that. But he's certainly someone who is a proven Premier League asset, and we should certainly not be judging him only on last season's performances because he barely played last season. Kevin Schade is another player to think about. He arrived at Brentford with a lot of fanfare. Everyone thought he was going to be this game-changing signing, but he has suffered from a lot of injuries since joining Brentford. He's fit now though. He scored against AFC Wimbledon, he scored against Watford, and with the news that Thiago is going to be out until around Christmas, and with Ivan Toney's future still up in the air, there is every chance that Brentford will line up with Mbeumo, Wissa and Schade on the opening day. Now, Schade has never been prolific in terms of goals or assists, but to be fair, he is only 22. So maybe this will be the season that he shines for Brentford and delivers. We've already mentioned Lewis Hall, who is having a very good pre-season with Newcastle. He's been playing in midfield. He's classed as a defender. He is also very young, but Newcastle fans are very excited about his potential impact this season. And with Sven Botman out with a long-term injury, Dan Burn may switch from left-back to centre-back, so that would then open up that slot for Hall as well. He's certainly not a guaranteed starter just yet, but he has been heavily involved in all Newcastle's pre-season games, and if that continues to be the case, you would have to assume that Eddie Howe plans to start him when the Premier League gets underway in a few weeks' time. And then one other player who is a bit of a left-field punt, and that is Aaron Ramsdale, who is expected to leave Arsenal. It could be a loan move. He's been linked with the likes of Wolves and Nottingham Forest and Southampton. But if you're in a larger draft league of 14 teams, he is a goalkeeper worth thinking about as a second option, because not many managers will be thinking about him because his future is still so unknown. So Ramsdale, another one that you just have to have a little thought about when you're drafting those goalkeepers at the back end of your draft night. On to players who are maybe a little under the radar right now, but who are worth considering in those later draft rounds. And these are players who might not yet be in the thinking of your rivals, so this could hopefully give you a bit of an edge on draft night. We mentioned him last week, but Steffi Mavididi has had an excellent pre-season for Leicester after a 12-goal, 6-assist campaign in the Championship. Leicester will not find it quite as easy this year as last, but he is up against Spurs on the opening day at home, and Spurs play with the sort of high line that might suit him. He's a guaranteed starter. He could turn out to be Leicester's talisman as well, especially given Jamie Vardy's injury problems, so he's very much one to really keep in mind. Daichi Kamada is another midfielder to think about. He's joined Palace on a free transfer, but he's a £20 million player in reality, and he has been outstanding in every Crystal Palace friendly so far. He's played under Oliver Glasner before with great success. At Frankfurt, he scored 40 goals and picked up 33 assists. He got 22 goal returns in his final season under Glasner, and he's likely to be on set pieces as well. So with Elise gone and Eze potentially on his way out as well, he could really take on that key creative role for Crystal Palace. We've already touched on Harvey Elliott as well, so we won't repeat ourselves, but he really came into his own at the back end of last season, got 4 assists and a goal in his final 6 games, and he's continued that form into pre-season. So let's see if he starts in Liverpool's final friendly of pre-season against Sevilla. Amad Diallo is another one we won't dwell on too much, but he's obviously staking a claim in pre-season for a place in that United front line, although he will be up against the likes of Garnacho and Rashford for a starting berth. Emil Smith-Rowe, if he can stay fit, could be a good 5th midfield option. You suspect Fulham will try to build the team around him, and that could see him become a really good route to points. In his breakout season with Arsenal, he hit double figures in terms of goals, so there's no reason why he couldn't do that again as the main man at Craven Cottage. The only worry there, of course, is his fitness problems. And then finally, Ben Brereton Diaz at Southampton. He signed for them this week. He spent last season on loan at Sheffield United. He's cost the St Mary's club £7 million. He had a good impact at Bramall Lane last year, to be fair. Got 6 goals in 14 appearances. A few seasons ago, he hit 22 goals in the Championship, and he followed that up with 14 the following season. And if you extrapolate what he did in those 14 games in the Premier League last year, playing for the worst team in the division, by the way, over a full season, you might be looking at around a 16-goal season, which you'd obviously take, wouldn't you? You'd take that, yes. The answer is yes. You would definitely take that. So hopefully that's given you a bit of food for thought in terms of players who might not be too high on your watch list, but who, when the rounds are running out and the top picks have gone, could be good options. And they could be options that have been overlooked by your rivals. Okay then, thank you for listening to today's pod. We've gone through quite a lot of stuff, and we will be back next week with more stuff. I hope you're getting set for your draft night, you're doing your homework, you're setting your watch list, and you're in good shape for the big one. We'd love to see your draft teams as and when they've been finalised, by the way, so do get in touch with us on X or on Instagram with those screenshots. We're at FPL Draft Zone on both platforms, and if you're not already subscribed to the pod, do make sure you do that right now. It would also be lovely, by the way, if you could give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, as that will really help other people to find us. And nice comments in general on all the other podcast platforms would be brilliant as well. Go on, do something nice for once. Do something nice. Anyway, that's it for this week. We will be back next week when we will be 7 days closer to the start of the Premier League season. But until then, it's bye for now.